Das Radical.
Hi, my name is Johan Phoenix, and I'm here to tell you all about my country, Iceland. I'm a 27-year-old writer, amateur YouTuber who currently works for a greedy monopolistic corporation. And before I get into the 2017 election results, let us first talk about some basic Icelandic history. And when I mean basic, I mean basic. I'm gonna take the entire 1200-year history of Iceland and water it down into a few bullet points for you, just to get you sped up on your history exam about Iceland that you will probably never have to do. Anyway, let us begin. In the year 871, this guy showed up in what is today Reykjavik and decided that here he wanted to build his farm. And thus he became the first man to settle in Iceland and die here, thus becoming, well, the first Icelander. Over the next few decades, hundreds and thousands of more settlers would arrive, so in the first decades of the 10th century, most of the arable land in Iceland had been settled by Nordic farmers. In the year 930, 39 of the most powerful local rulers decided to come together at what is today Þingvellir, which was also Þingvellir back then, and decided to create a parliament in order to govern the whole country. These 39 local rulers would meet twice a year to discuss matters of law and order. This was not a representative republic like today, but more of a feudal representative parliament, because the local rulers' wars were still feudal. That is, their title was passed on to their oldest son, but titles could also be kind of bought and passed on to somebody else if they didn't trust their son, although that usually didn't happen. And also it was not illegal for two or more rulers to control one Senate seat, and also it wasn't illegal for one ruler to have the control over more than one district. So yeah, kind of loose on the regulation there.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away.
In the year 1000, Christianity was accepted as the sole religion for the whole country, replacing the old Nordic pagan religion. In 1264, the Parliament, or Alþingi, as it is still called today, decided that the King of Norway would become the highest ruler of Iceland, ruling over the representatives of the island nation. However, there was still quite a bit of self-governance in Iceland for the time being. In 1397, the Kalmar Union was created, which was a personal union between Denmark, Norway and Sweden, and all of their dependencies, as they were called, under a single monarch. This union only lasted until around the mid-16th century, after which Sweden split from the union, but Iceland remained under the Danish crown. There had been a succession struggle in Norway. The king there had died, so the highest authority over Iceland moved over to Denmark, where it would remain for the next few centuries. From 1548 to 1550, the last Catholic bishop of Iceland, Jóhannesson, led an unsuccessful coup d'etat against all Danish authority in Iceland in an attempt to try to keep Iceland Catholic during the Reformation era. He was eventually captured and beheaded. It should be noted that historians disagree on how much he was fighting for Catholicism and Icelandic nationalism versus how much he was simply fighting to keep all the lands he owned, or technically not owned, but was under the Catholic Church, that he of course gained a lot of profits from. The end result of his defeat resulted in the Danish crown getting much more direct authority over Iceland. During the 16th and 17th centuries, several trade concessions, the most famous one was the one of 1602, made it harder and harder for Icelanders to trade with anyone who didn't have a specific trade permit handed out from the Danish crown. This proved eventually ruinous to the Icelandic economy for centuries, basically. And in 1662, the King of Denmark officially became the sole authority over all Icelandic affairs, more or less. The early 19th century saw the birth of Icelandic reform and independence movements, The most notable figure in this movement was, of course, our national hero, Jón Sigurðsson, and in 1874 the King of Denmark granted to give Iceland its first constitution, which was basically a copy of the Danish constitution, but addressed to the people of Iceland. And a few years before that, in the late 1840s, it was again made legal for Icelanders to trade with other nations on their terms. The Alþingi, the parliament, was re-established in 1845, although it still had no legislative authority and served more as an advisory board to Iceland. In 1904, Hannes Hafstein became the first minister of Iceland, technically prime minister, and thus establishing home rule in Iceland for the first time in centuries. On December 1st, 1918, Iceland became a sovereign state under the Danish crown, which meant that Iceland controlled all its internal affairs and could set its own law, and the king only had the authority to veto said law if he so chose, but he actually never did so.
In den Morgenstunden des 9. April landeten zum Schutze der norwegischen und dänischen Neutralität in zahlreichen Häfen Norwegens und Dänemarks deutsche Truppen. Eine in der Seekriegsgeschichte beispiellose Leistung. An Bord eines der Transporter...
In May 1940, Denmark was invaded by Germany and occupied for the duration of the war. Thus, Iceland was now completely cut off from their king in Denmark. This technical Icelandic independence only lasted a few days, since on May 10th, 1940, the British armed forces invaded Iceland in a, well, bloodless invasion, seeing that nobody got hurt or killed, and most Icelanders actually cheered the British from being here to protect Iceland against an impending German invasion, which eventually never came.
Reykjavik is the capital and chief town. Here, British troops are attending church parade. There's not a lot of scope for billeting in Iceland, so very rapidly the army has gone to work to provide its own accommodation in order that Icelanders may be inconvenienced as little as possible by the occupation. The next job was to get to know the country. That meant army exercises with Bren carriers dashing about over the treeless, hedgeless flats of the glacial valley.
And on June 17, 1944, Iceland was declared an independent republic, and the title of king in our constitution was replaced with President of Iceland, and a provision was added into the constitution on how said president should be elected. And since then, well, what can you say? Reform movements, social movements, social progress, political parties have come and gone. Iceland eventually obtained one of the highest standards of living in the Western world, so yeah, go team! And that's where we are today, basically. Okay, and in the next video we'll be discussing the results of the 2017 Icelandic parliamentary election. Stay tuned.
Das Radikal.